So hi everybody. Today we're going to discuss interactions among living things. This is found in Chapter 1, Lesson 3 of our books. Your teacher will tell you on what page to write this in your journal. So on that page, make sure at the top of the page you put the date down. By the time this unit is done, I will be able to, number 6, explain how an organism's adaptations help it survive. 7, describe competition and predation. And number 8, identify 3 types of symbiotic relationships. Remember, feel free to pause the video at any time if you are a slower writer and need to get yourself caught up. So let's look at goal number 6, which is right up here. How do an organism's adaptations help it survive? First off, let's start with the definition. Natural selection. This is the process that makes an organism better suited to a specific type of environment. Notice that it's in red, and so make sure in your notes that you've highlighted this word. And we're going to discuss how it works. First off, in any population, there are typically lots of organisms that are born, babies. These babies have a variety of traits. Traits can include size, weight, color, fur length, eye color, etc., etc. So those are the traits. Number 2 says that they're born with a variety, a variation in those traits. For example, some babies are born longer than others. Some are short, some are in between. Some are born with blue eyes, some are born with brown eyes, some are born with black eyes, depending on what the species is. So this is not surprising that there's a variety of traits. There's a bunch of different kinds of traits that an organism is born with, and then among those traits, there's a lot of variation between them. Number 3, some of these variations are better suited to the environment than others. For example, if you're a mouse and you're born with blonde fur and you're living in the desert on sand, you are probably going to be pretty well off because you blend in and predators are not going to be able to see you very easily. However, if you're a mouse that's born with black fur or very dark colored fur and you're living on desert sand, you're going to stick out. So you are not better suited to that environment. So what does that mean? That means that the darker mouse is probably has a very good chance of being picked off by a predator. As a result, he doesn't get to grow up and reproduce and have his own babies. The mouse that is born with the lighter colored fur can grow up, reproduce, and pass on those genes that say the babies are going to have lighter colored genes or fur color. So those organisms that have the traits that make them better suited have a better chance of living longer, long enough to reproduce and pass on those traits. Let's listen to this example of snakes.
Here's a sound you'd rather not hear out on a hike. It's a prairie rattlesnake from western South Dakota. Well, there's only one thing worse than a rattlesnake giving you that famous warning, one that gives you no warning at all. That's what's been happening with some rattlesnakes in South Dakota's Black Hills. They have apparently lost their ability to rattle. And South Dakota Public Broadcasting's Gary Ellenbolt reports that may be good for those snakes, but bad for people.
On a nice day during her senior year of high school, Bonnie Fleming decided to take a walk in South Dakota's Black Hills.
There was a rock outcropping, and I went to sit on that rock, but I just hopped kind of over it. And there was a rattlesnake right under my legs.
It was Fleming's first encounter with a rattlesnake, which left her alone once it made its famous noise. The sound made by Crotalus viridis, or the prairie rattlesnake, is one of the most chilling sounds heard in nature. There's a specific purpose to the rattle, to keep larger animals and humans away. But Terry Phillip, a naturalist at Reptile Gardens in Rapid City, says the rattle often leads to the snake's demise.
And the snakes that are discovered are the ones that have a really strong muscle next to their rattle so that they actually function the way they're supposed to. So people be out walking or gardening or whatever, and a rattlesnake starts rattling. Well, it gets the end of the shovel or the 22 pistol or whatever.
Over the past couple of years, Phillip has noticed an increasing number of rattlesnakes with what he calls curlicue tails. Imagine the tail on a pig and you'll get the idea. Phillip says the tail muscles on these snakes have apparently atrophied, so they can't shake their rattle. And rattlesnakes that can camouflage themselves well are less likely to be killed.
And so the snakes that have that genetic defect, those are the ones that are surviving to then reproduce, and they're passing on that genetic defect to their offspring.
A genetic defect is just one of few theories that might explain this change. Phillip says rattlesnakes that can't rattle tend to be more aggressive since they're missing a key protective element. Bonnie Fleming, the hiker who encountered a prairie rattlesnake in high school, says that's not good.
I think that's terrifying. Every encounter I've had, I've been able to avoid them because of that warning. So it's really helpful.
Black Hills State University professor Brian Smith has made a career out of researching rattlesnakes. He has about 20 prairie rattlers near his office on the Spearfish, South Dakota campus. Smith says it may not always be a genetic defect that keeps rattlers from rattling.
Snakes do get abnormalities. Snakes do get their tails can be broken during failed predation attempts.
You shouldn't think a rattlesnake has to rattle before biting. It doesn't always do that, so you should always keep your eyes and ears open for rattlesnakes. And if you think you'll be safe from a snake bite during the cold South Dakota winter, Smith says that's not necessarily true.
We've recorded them in temperatures close to 40 degrees. I've collected them every month of the year except February and March. So we have collected them in January, basking at a den entrance.
So, to review, if you're hiking in South Dakota and hear this sound, take it as a polite invitation to stay away. But it's a good idea to keep your eyes on the trail, just in case there's a rattlesnake that won't, or can't, rattle if you startle it. For NPR News, I'm Gary Ellenbolt in Vermillion, South Dakota.
So, we just heard about an organism, a snake, whose traits, and this is the trait of being born without a rattler, makes it better suited. Humans are walking along the trail. If they hear it, the rattler rattles, the humans will hear it. They get out their shovel and they kill it. And so in this case, in this particular environment, it's much better if you're a rattler that doesn't have the ability to rattle. And so there are lots of snakes born. Many are born with the ability to rattle very loud. Some of them are very quiet. Some of them are in between. And some of them can't rattle at all. The ones who can rattle really loud probably aren't going to last very long. They're going to get killed by a human on the trail. That means they can't reproduce. That means they can't pass on the genes for rattling very loud. And pretty soon, when this happens enough, generation after generation, the only snakes that are surviving are the ones that can't rattle. That's how natural selection works. So these traits are called adaptations. And notice that this is in red, so make sure it's highlighted. It is a vocabulary word. An adaptation is a behavior or a physical characteristic of a species that allows it to live successfully in the environment. So in this case, with the rattlesnakes, their adaptation is a physical characteristic, a muscle that's attached to the rattler that doesn't work very well. Therefore, they can't rattle. So that's a physical characteristic that they have that allows them to live successfully in their environment. Think about thick fur of a polar bear. So without the thick fur, they would not be able to survive diving in the very cold ocean waters to get their food, or to live outside of the water in their very cold environment. So thick fur of a polar bear is an adaptation. It allows it's a characteristic, physical characteristic that allows polar bears to live successfully in the Arctic. Camouflage, think about an Arctic hare, that's a rabbit. It has gray fur that turns white. in the wintertime. So it's gray in the summertime when there's no snow. It kind of matches the forest floor. And then when it turns white in the wintertime, it matches the snow. So this is, again, a physical characteristic that a rabbit, an Arctic hare, has that allows it to better successfully live in its environment. So because of these adaptations, an organism ends up with a specific role in its environment. So a niche, and there's our vocabulary word, is an organism's role in its habitat. So write that down, highlight it in red. A synonym for the word niche is a job. What's the job that an organism plays in its habitat? For example, it could include what type of food it eats. Maybe that's the job. Birds eat insects, so its job is to keep the insect population under control. It could be how it gets its food, what organism it eats, when it reproduces. All of these things are things that animals do, organisms do in their environment, and that's called its niche. So let's look at competition, which is our 7th goal. Competition is in red. It's a vocabulary word. It's the struggles between organisms to survive as they attempt to use the same limited resources. Write that down, highlight it in red. It's a vocabulary word. Weeds in a garden compete for nutrients, water, and sunlight. So there's an example of competition. So they compete with the garden plants. However, different adaptations can reduce competition and help the organism survive. So if you look at different adaptations that an organism might have, it can reduce competition. If it reduces competition, then it increases its chances for survival. For example, this is a clip art of an evergreen tree. This right here is a warbler. And this warbler is a yellow-rumped warbler, and it's a species that feeds in the lower part of the tree and at the bases of the middle branches. So this is where it likes to feed. This one is also a warbler. It's called the bay-breasted warbler. This species feeds in the middle part of the tree. Another warbler, this is called the Cape May warbler. This species feeds at the tips of the branches near the top of the tree. So 3 different warblers, and they eat insects. If they were all eating insects in the top of the tree, then they'd have to fight, probably, compete over those insects. But because they've spread themselves out and they've learned, they have an adaptation that is a behavioral adaptation. Their behavior is to choose, if you will, to feed in different parts of the tree. This increases its chances, all 3 of them, their chances for survival, because they're not all after the same bugs. So how does avoiding competition benefit species like these birds? There we go. They avoid competition for the insects that they're after, and it benefits them because there's plenty of food for everyone. How are people who work shifts at different times of the day avoiding competition? So I think of a company that, say, has 20 employees and only 5 computers. That means 15 people can't use the computer to get their job done. Okay, that might be a problem because they may very well need the computer to get the job done. There might be that much work to do. So if the employer schedules 5 of the people to work very early morning, 5 to work around the noon hour, early afternoon, 5 to work late afternoon, and 5 to work into the evening hours, then all of them can use a computer, the 5 computers at different times, and more work can get done. They don't have to compete for the computer. Can you think of any organisms who work shifts, other than these warblers, of course? There's some organisms that hunt at night. Are there some organisms that hunt during the day? Yep, that's called shift working. Let's talk about predation. Definition is one organism kills another for food. It's in red. Make sure it's highlighted as a vocab word. What happens when the death rate is greater than the birth rate? We learned this in Chapter 1, Lesson 2. When the death rate is more than the birth rate, then the population numbers will go down. And predation can have a major effect on the population size. Predators can really increase the death rate, and if they do that to the point where it exceeds the birth rate, the population will go down. Now, keep in mind that herbivores are also considered predators. Remember, herbivores are animals that eat plants, such as giraffes and cows and horses, etc. And so they're considered predators on plants. And so they can really, really make the plant population go down or keep it under control. So how can predation keep prey species healthy? Think about a population of, wildebeest or something like that hang out in big herds. And as wildebeest get old and or sick, then perhaps a gazelle or some kind of a lion that preys on them would probably go after the old and the sick ones first. Why? Because the old ones can't keep up and they're not going to be part of the herd. And it's easier if you're a predator to go after a single prey rather than to try and pick somebody out of a big crowd. And same thing with diseased ones. They're probably not going to be able to stay with the herd very easily. And so as a result, the predators really, their niche, their role is to keep the prey population very healthy because it's getting rid of the ones that are sick. So let's look at some predator adaptations here that we have. This thing right here is called a sundew plant. It's covered with sticky bulbs on stalks. If an insect like a fly lands on the bulb, it stays, it's ensnared in the sticky goo while the plant digests it. And so it's kind of like a Venus flytrap. And so this is the sticky goo that traps this insect that's inside here. So this is an adaptation. The sticky goo is a physical characteristic. It's an adaptation of this plant. And this plant is considered to be a predator. We don't often think of plants as predators. This is the jellyfish. I think most of you know that jellyfish, their tentacles, contain a poisonous substance that paralyzes tiny water animals. And if they're paralyzed, they can't move, and that allows them then to suck them up in the middle and start using some digestive enzymes on them so that they can get a meal. Here's a cheetah. His adaptation is to run at very high speeds to catch its prey, and it has muscles and bones that are built for that. These are both predators, an owl and a bat. One of the things that they do, their adaptations, is to hunt at night. And that's a behavioral adaptation. Now, the physical adaptation that it has is that these owls have very big eyes, and their eyes contain a bunch of cells called rod cells. Rod cells are what allow us to have the ability to animals to see in black and white, which means we can see at night. Now, humans also have rod cells. We don't have quite as many or as sophisticated as an owl's, and we don't need them either, but an owl does, and so they have a lot of rod cells, and their rod cells are very well advanced. Bats, on the other hand, their eyesight is pretty poor. What they have instead is an unusual adaptation that helps them hunt. And I think you all know that they use a form of radar called echolocation to find their flying insects. They have these really big ears here, and then the radar bounces off of them, and it gives them a location as to where the insect is very precisely. So even though they can't see very well, this radar lets them zero right in on the predator, on the prey that they're after. This is a frog. This is a warning. The adaptation that this frog has is called warning coloring. Like many brightly colored animals, this frog is very poisonous. It's very bright blue and yellow colors warn predators not to eat it. Porcupines. Porcupines, as we know, have these quills. Quills are very, very dangerous to these porcupines, or to animals that go after the porcupines, I'm sorry. Skunks, we're probably all familiar with skunks and their adaptations. They have a physical characteristic called a scent gland, and that scent gland has scent in it that isn't very good to smell, so that keeps predators away. This is a fish that has false coloring, it's called. Right here, it confuses predators because the predators think that this is an eye spot. It's a false eye spot, and then the predator will attack here, the eye, and then this allows the fish to swim safely away in the opposite direction. Now think about it, if the predator attacks the real face, which is up here, the eyes and the nose, then that could be dangerous, right? The brain's up here as well. And so the fish stands a much better chance of being attacked back here than it does up front. This right here is not a leaf. This is camouflage. It's actually a walking leaf insect. But if you were a predator, you might be fooled into looking elsewhere for a meal, because as you can see, this insect right here looks a lot like a leaf. And so a lot of predators are like, I'm after bugs. I'm not going to waste my time with this leaf here. This one is called mimicry, this prey adaptation. The octopus right up here is trying to mimic this venomous soulfish. Both of them hang out in the bottom of the ocean, and so he's trying to mimic the color, the shape, and the swimming style, because many predators have learned that they don't go after this venomous soulfish, and so if they think this guy, the octopus, is a soulfish, they'll stay away from him too. This is called a pangolin. It has protective covering. This is a small African mammal, and when it's threatened, the pangolin protects itself by rolling up into a scaly ball, and this is like armor. And so predators that want to do something with it, like eat it, can't, because it's hard to get through, and because it's in a ball, the most that happens is that some predators come along and push it with their paws and make him roll around, which doesn't hurt him. So a lot of adaptations as well that the prey have. So it's not just predators that have adaptations. Prey also have adaptations. So symbiosis is our 8th goal, and so we're going to learn about symbiosis now. We're going to click on this following link, and remember that 3-tab foldable we made before? In that, we're going to write the definition for each of the symbiotic relationships that we learn about in this video. We're going to put down an example of each, and there's going to be several in there, and you don't have to use any that are in the video. If you know of your own, you can certainly write that. And then you're going to draw a picture of each of these symbiotic relationships. Now, there are 3 of them, so listen carefully to the video as we find out what they are. Well, let's try this again here.
We're in the ocean of Southeast Asia and getting ready to search for a fish that lives in a place so dangerous that most other fish won't even come near it. Ready? Let's go diving. And after a bit of searching, I finally found it. The clownfish, or anemone fish as it's also called. The beautiful tentacles of the anemone are actually deadly to most fish. The tentacles have stinging organs called nematocysts, which fire tiny darts into fish that brush by. This stinging ability protects anemones from predators and helps them capture prey for food. But how can clownfish hide in such a dangerous place? Well, that's because clownfish have a symbiotic relationship with anemones that is so important that clownfish are almost always found among anemones. Symbiotic relationships are interactions between two species that can benefit either one or both species. Symbiotic relationships are divided up into three major categories. Parasitism benefits one species while the other is harmed. Like ticks, for example. There are many examples here in the ocean. Take parasitic fish lice, for example, that cling to a host fish and feed on its body fluids. Amazingly, fish will sometimes find a cleaner fish or a cleaner shrimp to help remove the parasites from their scales, mouth and gills. When this happens, a mutualistic relationship is formed between the fish and the cleaner organism. Mutualism is a symbiotic relationship in which both species benefit from the relationship. This bird here eats the tick, which benefits the cow. In our fish example, the host fish is clean off its parasites, and the cleaner fish gets a free meal. Both species benefit, but not the sea lice anymore. Hey, I already brushed my teeth today. The third symbiotic relationship is commensalism. Commensalism benefits one organism, but the other one is neither harmed nor helped. You might have had a bug hitchhiking on you at some point without knowing it. An example here in the ocean is when remoras hitch a ride on sharks, big rays or turtles. The remora attaches itself with a disc on its head and then hitch a ride and feed off the food scraps that the host animal leave behind. So the sharks are not affected by the remoras being there, but the remoras get a free ride and a free meal. Sounds good to me. So back to our clownfish. Clownfish are protected from predators by living among anemones, and in exchange the clownfish chase away fish and other animals that could harm the anemone. What kind of symbiotic relationship is this? That's right, mutualistic. Okay, but we still have one important question to answer. How can the clownfish be immune to the anemone sting? Well, a clownfish must first get used to its host anemone by developing a protective mucus coating, kind of like when we use sunscreen. And there are two possible explanations for how this happens. The first explanation is that the clownfish secretes its own mucus, which lacks the substance that makes the anemone fire its stinging nematocysts. It's as if the clownfish had a protective force field or invisible cape. And the second explanation is that the clownfish uses mucus produced by the anemone. The unprotected clownfish initially touches the anemone with its fins, even getting stung slightly at first, but over time gains the protective mucus coating. Symbiotic relationships happen everywhere, even in our own bodies. Did you know that every time you eat yogurt, you're actually filling up your digestive tract with symbiotic bacteria? That's right, you become the host for these natural bacteria, and they help you process and digest the food that you eat every day. Alright, so next time you go outside, stop and look around and see how many symbiotic relationships you can spot around you and record what they are. And remember, never stop exploring your world.
There you go. 3 kinds of symbiotic relationships. See you later.